Thanks so much for coming on the show today and really excited to dive in. I'm a huge fan of your paper.
Thank you.
When I came across it, it felt like a breath of fresh air amidst all the sort of buzz and evangelism and particularly like vendors out there who are really pushing the DORA metrics as something
Yeah,
everyone needs to measure. So I was really curious. We've only just recently met. What's your story for what drove you to write this paper?
I've been a software engineer for a long time. And for the past several, since I'd say 2014, I've been focusing on how do we do continuous delivery. I was on the pilot team who was trying to figure out CD for the first time in a very large organization I used to work for. And there was a lot of lessons learned along the way, a lot of things to not do, but we were pushing CD because CD we knew helped improve engineering excellence, and it also improved team morale and customer outcomes and everything else, right? CD is it's not the goal, it's the engine to change your organization. And we were doing that pilot, and then ultimately several of us went to join the new centralized platform that was built around the goal of we're going to do continuous delivery. It's very opinionated that way. And we started using metrics as a way to encourage that behavior. We were gamifying the metrics. And that has its dangers. Early on, it was very useful. Later on, it became less useful as people started misusing them. But then also early on, Accelerate came out and confirmed a lot of what we were saying as far as CD making everything better. And they pointed these metrics. And I bought 6 cases of Accelerate. At the time I was leading the DevOps dojo for the organization, and our job was to teach CD and to interface with leadership and do anything required to help push CD into the way we worked across the entire enterprise globally. And I bought 6 cases of that and distributed them to every SVP, VP, and director around the world. I had people like taking them to India for me with a note inside, please read this, and hey, look over here at this thing over here on metrics as well. And the that almost immediately, it wasn't obvious, but it started going south. I started getting feedback where every month people would be spending 2 days gathering delivery metrics to report up to the senior director, and then they were judging teams against each other about how they were doing. It was just a complete misunderstanding because we'd read the books and we'd done the things. And so we had the context and we were first with knowledge. And this is something that I started trying to solve in that organization early on. First, herding the cats on metrics, putting training around it, trying to get those people together and reset course. And then I decided we really need to do a talk about this because it's more broad than just my organization. And I was talking to another friend of mine who at the time I think was still at Capital One, but he's now at SVP elsewhere. And he called me when I was in between jobs because I left that job and I was moving to another job. And he called me and said, hey, Bryan, we really need to talk about metrics. He said that because he and I are deep in that DevOps community and along with other people, we are part of the problem. We were pushing DORA metrics, and without understanding, people weren't getting the context. And he said, we got to fix it. I'm like, I know. I've been working on a talk. I've submitted it to DevOps Enterprise Summit. Hopefully it gets picked up. I'm doing everything I can to see what we can do to adjust course. I'm a board advisor for the Value Stream Management Consortium. I was reaching out to vendors to talk to them about, I knew that they're building DORA dashboards. I was like, hey, I'd like to compare notes on what you're doing. And I was building dashboards at Walmart as well. I'm working on an open source dashboard for the Department of Defense for delivery metrics. And I want to just compare notes and see if we can help each other with some ideas. I'm not a competitor. I'm working for the DoD. And started giving them some direct feedback on some of the things that they were doing on dashboards because, again, they were just publishing these metrics, sometimes with complete misunderstanding of what the definition of the metric was. Just to throw a metric out there and say, we have a DORA dashboard. And trying to poke them to adjust course. And there's some tools out there, I'm very vocal about how incredibly destructive they are. And I will point that out whenever possible because it hurts the goals that we have. And I saw this going on. And so I was like pushing and like talked to Gene Kim. I was like, Gene, I know there's a selection committee. We really need to talk about metrics. And I had this talk, it was ready, called Making Metrics Matter. We really need to talk about metrics. This is a huge problem. The DORA metrics are being used very destructively. And he said, yeah, I think you're right. But I don't like the title. I said, we need to make it. He gave me that title of How to Misuse and Abuse DORA Metrics. He said, I wanted something controversial. I'm like, perfect. Because I was trying to soft pedal just to make sure that you guys didn't get annoyed at me. But it's what it is. It's we have goals as a community to elevate the entire community and help people help themselves, to grow this ability so that we can deliver sooner, safer, and happier. We can satisfy our end users better. We can have less burnout. We can have better bottom lines for everybody. All of this is possible if we do the right things, but misusing these metrics this way was harming those outcomes. And so it's up to all of us to try to fix it. And so this is my attempt.
That's such a great background. I'm particularly interested in diving into, you mentioned you were there at the very beginning of all this. You mentioned accelerate, that the fire was lit from within what you call the DevOps community. I am not part of that community. I'm really curious to hear from you in a little more detail. Like, where did accelerate sort of land, and how did it become so big from your perspective?
Accelerate was basically confirmation of everything that we've seen before. We had the state of DevOps reports coming out that we kept pointing to, say, look, see, everything's better, see? And so when you have it in a book, it becomes more real. And then you have people like me who've been screaming into hurricanes or trying to convince CEOs or CTOs that now it's a book, so it's real. And so all of us were pushing this book. We're like, read the book. Unfortunately, everyone reads page 19, and that's it. But read the book. There's an audiobook. You don't even have to read it. Just listen to it on your drive to work or when you're out jogging or whatever. But read the book, because everything when the book came out, I tweeted Nicole Forsgren, and I said, I really appreciate this very concise summary of everything that we know is true. And she says, it's a summary. I'm like, yeah, 270 pages is absolutely a summary, but it's awesome. And so I still push it because the book is good. You just have to read the book so you understand the context.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned people just read page 19. I'm assuming that's where the four key
That's
metrics
where the
are
four
listed.
metrics are, is page 19.
Yeah, yeah, I share that experience.
270 pages, that's page 19. And there's more than four metrics.
Yeah. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do you know if the authors of the book really, when they wrote the book, was the intention that these metrics be used in the field in such a standardized way, or were these metrics more illustrative of the research and the story around CD that they were trying to tell?
Honestly, I haven't asked Gene, and I haven't talked to Nicole about it, or Jez. I haven't had the opportunity to sit down and have a beer and talk to him about it. But if you look at the context of those metrics, you're looking at, we need a way to go and evaluate how different organizations are doing so that we can make some correlations between some of the things that we believe to be true. We have these hypotheses, and so we need some metrics to track some of these hypotheses and then compare it to organizational outcomes. And so the metrics are derived from survey questions. And there's strengths and weaknesses to that. You can only get to so much information in a survey question. You also have the problem of people, how they read the survey question. But if you have a big enough set, and I'm not a statistician, that's Nicole's dollar, but hopefully you have a big enough set that some of that stuff balances out. But when you look at how the metrics are written and you try to apply it to automation so that you can track it, it doesn't work well. There's other ways to get to those same sort of indices, or what am I looking for? Those indicators. There's other ways to get to those indicators that work better if you're trying to track it real time. Because I've done that in now 2 organizations. I know what to track. And I've read the book very closely, gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, because if I'm going to go and criticize how people are using them, I want to be correct. So I'm correct. But I don't believe they're meant to be used in the field that way. And they definitely weren't meant to be used as a maturity model. And I say that because if you read Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and Dave Harley, they talk about a maturity model that was written in 2010. The maturity model was also misused to judge maturity. That happened at my organization and many other organizations. If you go read Accelerate, they say don't use maturity models. People are using metrics for a maturity model. They say don't use maturity models. So if you take all of this into play, I doubt that they meant them to be used in the field this way to judge how well you're doing at continuous delivery.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective and something I'd love to ask the authors at some point as well. But I'm curious, before we go into some of the points in your paper, I'm curious what kinds of conversations have you had since publishing this and giving these talks? I'm curious, just what have you seen out in the field beyond just your own kind of experiences with this?
I had several conversations, quite vocal in my attempts to try to help people outside of whatever organization I'm in. I'm on this. Honestly, I have a personal mission. I want every developer to live a better life, and that's only possible if their organizations are better. And so I talk to a lot of people all the time, and I've had several one-on-one conversations with people about this, vendors, companies, just comparing notes and giving my perspective. Saying this is why I'm saying the things I'm saying, and to do with it what you will. My advice is free; it's worth every penny. But I've had a lot of people tell me, "Thank you. This clarifies things quite a bit." I've honestly have not had any blowback or anybody challenge me and tell me I'm wrong. They might be doing it silently. I don't know. It's anecdotal evidence that it's helpful, but I've had a lot of people say that's been helpful and helped them improve what they've been trying to do.
I'd love to get into some more of your experiences, but in some of those conversations you've had, without sharing any names or companies, of course, are there any stories that really just stand out to you as exemplifying or underscoring the problem that you're talking about with Dora Metrics? Like anything that just makes you go,
I'd say probably not in those conversations. I don't think that I'm just me. We don't have an NDA. They're not going to share like their deepest, darkest secrets. I've seen that happen multiple occasions personally in organizations I've been involved with. So I don't need their horror stories. I know the horror stories because it's always the same horror story. The details might be different, but it's always the same horror story.
in the paper, you have a section, like a heading that says metrics gone amok or metrics gone amok.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good characterization of what the industry looks like right now, particularly with all the vendors evangelizing Dora Metrics.
Yeah. There's a core reason for that, though, is that people don't do the hard work of what are we trying to discover? Hey, we have these metrics. Now I have an easy button. I'll have to measure these metrics. Well, why? So we can be more mature. What does that even mean? Anyway, I interrupted your question, but that's the thing, right? Is like they give them an easy button, no context, and problem solved. Now I can go worry about something else.
And that's another line in your paper I really loved. You said when Accelerate was released, many of us saw it as the easy button for communicating what, and of course now it's the easy button for measurement within organizations as well. So on that note of asking why, do you have an opinion on like should everyone be using the Dora metrics, or are they specifically suitable for an organization that's dealing with a particular challenge, or is at a particular point in their journey? What's your thinking around that?
First, I would say that they need to read the book and see the other like 14 metrics that are explicitly talked about in the book and understand what those metrics are supposed to be for, and then read the appendices where they talk about recommended practices that everybody should practice. If you're doing software engineering, you should track these metrics, all of them, and understand why they are. Continuous delivery is the most effective way to deliver software in every context. There's a project a few of us started up last year at DevOps Enterprise Summit, minimumcd.org, where we put together this is the minimum standard that you should aim for if you're going to be going after continuous delivery, the absolute bare MVP for continuous delivery in every context. Then you add on to it depending on what your context is, because continuous delivery makes everything better. But the reason I got into metrics early on was that when we were piloting CD, our management was challenging us on how do you know it's better? How are you measuring this? And I had to get the very first time I went to DevOps Enterprise Summit was to answer that question. What do we measure? That was in 2015. I was like, what do we measure? And sat in several, quizzed lots of people, sat in several round tables, learned lots of things, like never look at one metric. You have to use offsetting metrics. And I talked about the guardrails in that paper. But those metrics are very useful, and I use them. But I also put training around them so other people know how to use them, because they tell us that our batch size is going down. They give us insights into stability. I think the key thing is that they don't tell you if things are going well. They only tell you if things are going poorly. And so you can't say, look, we got the metrics are good, so we're doing good. No, the metrics are good. Let's explore why. Are they really good? Are we measuring incorrectly? What's our data quality on these things look like? These are all questions. They only cause questions. They never answer anything. It's the oil pressure's high. Is that good or bad? It depends.
Yeah, that last sort of thought of yours is, I think, really key. And I have an experience. I actually work with Nicole at GitHub, and
Yeah.
we roll out the DORA metrics at GitHub,
Yeah.
and we rolled them out. I don't remember where we fell in terms of the benchmarks. We did compare it to the Google benchmarks, and I recall that our takeaway was, yeah, we're doing pretty. We're not bad. We're not maybe as great as we could be, but so what? What do we now do with this?
Yeah. So in the dojo, we used those plus some additional metrics to help teams improve towards continuous delivery. But honestly, the most important metric for helping a team improve is going to be CI metrics and not delivery metrics, because they don't always control delivery. The metric around the cycle time, there's two different definitions of what cycle time it is in Accelerate next to each other. And everybody points to pipeline cycle time, which is the least interesting of the two from the point of view of it's not going to be your first constraint is how long your pipeline is in almost every occasion. It's usually going to be how big the unit of work is. So if you go from started to delivered instead of committed to delivered, you're going to get much more information about what needs to be fixed. Then fix your pipeline. And we see that all the time, but we would focus on that delivery, that development cycle time, not the delivery cycle time. And we'd focus on how frequently integrating code. And we look at defect rates, and we track those religiously daily. We show the team, hey, this is where we are today. This is what CI looks like. If you can't do CI with CD, so we have to be doing CI. And here's the line for CI, and we're here. What else can we optimize so we can get closer to CI and have a higher degree of quality and ultimately more happiness? Because we're not religious zealots. We're just engineers who've worked that way and know it's true.
Yeah, that's really, it reminds me. So at GitHub, when we had lead time, we would go talk to teams and engineering directors and VPs and ask them, hey, here's your number. How could we improve this? And it was funny, to your point, we definitely had some build issues, particularly around some of it's publicly documented, so I can share about we were having some kind of build issues with our mono repo, but the things that these teams and leaders told us were actually didn't have to do with the build times at all. They were things like requirement churn and quality and
So this is super important. In 2020 at All Day DevOps, I gave another talk called Why Can't We CD? And leaky pipelines is one of those where you have, this is our primary flow, but for hot fixes, we do this completely other thing, which that's not CD. But it was some basic fundamental stuff. Don't know how to test. Don't work well as a team because we've been driven into a push system instead of a pull system, and we see this is my work instead of I'm currently working on this for the team, and I need the team's help when I need the team's help, and it's that if I fail, the team fails. Basic teamwork, ownership, and crappy requirements are poorly refined because there's poor teamwork and because we don't know how to test. They're all interrelated, and that's why we can't CD, and it's the fundamental stuff. And those metrics tell you, they give you indications of how that's going if you understand those things. And we learned those things by doing those things and trying to figure out why can't we CD. On the very first team we were piloting on, I literally went onto the team as a tech lead and wrote on the piece of paper the rules for continuous integration and said, okay, now what's blocking us from doing this today? Let's solve this as a team. And that's how we learned that these are these things. And then when we went and saw it again and again on every other team we went to work with, that's, a lot of teams. And that's just the common reasons why we can't CD. And the metrics give you insight into that if you know what they're telling you. And they're not telling you whether you're good or not.
For some people who read your paper or listen to this conversation, they maybe don't have a clear working definition of what you mean by CD.
Yeah.
Uh, I think even I have a conceptual kind of abstract definition of it. But when you say CD and when you wrote it on the wall, what are you really getting at?
So when I wrote it on the wall, I was just talking about CI. We have the CI is your first impediment. We had a goal in that organization of every team able to deploy daily. If you talk to Dave Farley, it's the ability to release the latest changes on demand. If you're on my team, we were able to release many times a day safely to production. That we have a pipeline that gives us so much confidence that pipeline will block bad stuff that we can just run. And so that ability to release on demand today's changes today, the way I really express it is if you are doing continuous delivery correctly, you can wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to solve a critical outage and go to bed at 3:20. You can make a change when you're half asleep, push it and not freak out. It's drama-free delivery. And so if you can't deploy on Friday, you've got things to fix. If you're saying, no, we don't want to deploy on Friday because it might mess up our weekend. No, you should be able to hit the deploy button on your way out the door and take your significant other to a movie while carrying a support pager.
That's
Then
great.
you're doing continuous delivery. Do you need to release that frequently all the time? It depends on your context. But if you're not exercising your pipeline, you're putting yourself at a security risk. This all plays together. Continuous delivery is a more secure, more quality. Everything's better. And so you have to think of it that way. This is what it means to be doing continuous delivery. It's not some whiz-bingy thing for kids who are in a startup who don't care about quality. It's very disciplined development.
I'm curious then with that sort of, and I love that definition, by the way, and it made me recall all kinds of 3 a.m. hot fixes.
I've carried
About
a
what,
pager for so many years.
but I'm curious, do you think then that with the DORA, the book and the metrics, the indicators all really revolving around proving and measuring continuous delivery, do you think then these indicators, part of the problem going on is that they've been taken out of context? I feel like
That's
we're
100% the problem. Yeah, that's 100% the problem because the metrics aren't proving that continuous delivery is better, right? Those four metrics are like, hey, we have some hypotheses. And they had other hypotheses, and they talked about this is what we learned from these surveys, and we made these correlations, and these things seem to be true. And I'm not reading that book saying, oh, they seem to be true, so this is true. I'm like, oh, this also aligns with our experience. So this is just confirmation that what we're seeing is being seen elsewhere. And so I can say that you should read this book because my experience and this are aligned. But it's not because of the metrics. The metrics are just trying to find a way to make correlations between behaviors and outcomes. And fundamentally, if you are pushing down smaller batches, as you shrink your batch size, it's like lifting it. You have to remove all the pain to do that. And that makes everything better. As long as you're also focusing on the guardrail of stability. If you focus on stability, you're going to slow down. If you focus on speed, you're going to get crappy quality. If you focus on both of them, your quality goes up, your speed goes up, your customers are happy. You produce less code to satisfy the need, which means your total cost of ownership drops. It makes everything better. But you have to read the book and understand the context to understand how to read those metrics.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd love to go into more the tactical side of your paper and your thoughts on it.
Sure.
So let's take a hypothetical organization, maybe 500 engineers, VP of engineering heard about the DORA metrics, read page 19 of that book or read a blog post about it. And they're like, okay, we need the DORA metrics. In your paper, you talk about you have these, I think it was 5 or 6 core or common misuses of the metrics. So I'd love to go into those a little bit if that works for you.
Sure.
One in particular that was really interesting was the moving the goalpost section. You gave this example, and I've seen this. So deployment frequency. People start counting the number of deployments or how frequently they're deploying. And you have this quote: we produced 10 releasable things this week. We're high performing. But then you ask, were they delivered as 10 separate artifacts, one big release? Maybe how big? Are they tiny hot fixes? Are they not? What's the solution? Like, how do you approach that? Is that just a flaw inherent in the metric itself? Or is
No,
there,
it's a flaw in the understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. It's not we've produced 10 releasable things. You're trying to reduce batch size. And if you produced 10 releasable things and delivered it as one big thing, did you reduce batch size? Because the reason, one of the many reasons you're trying to reduce batch size is to get feedback on quality. You can't get feedback on quality pre-production. You can get feedback on this is what we think quality looks like pre-production. But it takes production for you to validate your testing. The test for test is prod, right? And the larger the change set that goes to production, one of the analogies I use, it's a needle in a haystack, right? If you want fewer needles, you need smaller haystacks. Every haystack has got a needle in it. Every line of code is a potential defect, and the more lines of code you deliver, that's another metric. Gary Gruber suggested this metric, and I loved it, which is looking at code change as inventory. So I have a supply chain background, and what we're talking about here is the supply chain of software. And if you look at every line of code as inventory, if you anywhere in the supply chain world, you want to control your inventory. That doesn't mean you want to have it under lock and key. It means you don't want it. You want to keep inventory levels as low as possible because inventory costs money and risk damage. And so did we deliver 10,000 lines of code where it could have been 10, 1,000 line changes? And then we find out that 3 of those changes have serious defects in them. Or the first one did, it made everything else blow up. We need feedback on quality. And so you have to look at these things and what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to get rapid feedback. Can I get rapid feedback if I have 10 releasable changes or if I have 10 releases? If you're looking at the ultimate, this is generally unobtainium, but the ultimate would be I commit 1 line of code, it goes to production. So I can get feedback if I broke something immediately.
no. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think one of the themes here is just getting down to the principles behind the metrics and really focusing on those.
Because what happens is you get judged on this metric. They say, hey, here's these metrics, and we're going to be watching your dashboard. And then you're going to start coming up with ways to make it look good instead of what is it we're trying to accomplish. The metrics are there to help the people who are trying to improve, not to judge the people for not improving. And if you're using them, if you give me any metric that you say you're going to judge me by, I guarantee you I will game it. I'm a software engineer. How dumb do you think I am? But if we're using this in partnership to try to find ways to make all of our lives better, then I'm all over it. I'm going to dive in. How can we do this for real?
Another misuse that you talk about in your white paper is goal setting. I can't recall if this is something we'd explicitly done at GitHub, but I do remember us having conversations around setting OKRs specifically around DORA metrics. So what are your thoughts and experiences on that?
Yeah, actually, in my talk, the talk I gave that's related to this paper, I talk about OKRs for DORA metrics specifically, and how customers don't care about DORA metrics and OKRs are business outcomes. So, what are my thoughts on it? No. If you want to set a goal, say we need to improve. How are we improving today? Encourage improvement. There's all sorts of metrics that are incredibly destructive if your goal set. One of the code coverage is my favorite one. I've seen personally what happened when I thought it was a good idea to put coverage minimums And I've seen the tests that resulted, and I knew that we had untested code that we didn't know about because the coverage report said it was tested, right? Assert true equals true. That's an awesome test. But there's other metrics just like that. And if you set goals, then the metric is the goal. But that's never our goal. The business outcome is our goal. So what can we do to make ourselves more efficient, more effective, and more sustainable about delivery so we can improve business outcomes and reduce burnout, improve innovation? These are our goals, not the metrics. The metrics are indicators of different things, but they should never be a goal.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I actually heard your talk about test coverage. I was listening to it the other day and could definitely relate to the blank assertion phenomena that you described. You were sort of
I've seen
maybe,
that, by the way, many times in multiple organizations. So was not a one-off event.
wow, that's good to know. Um, you also talk about then vanity metrics. You said that the DORA metrics often become used as vanity radiators. And
Yeah.
so what, yeah, maybe
Well,
explain
so
that.
one of the things they talk about in Accelerate is they were talking about, in this instance, they were talking about WIP, work in progress, but that measuring WIP is only effective and if also coupled with an information radiator, so you can see the WIP, right? When you've got a dashboard, a friend of mine showed me an example dashboard like this from an entirely different organization that it says deploys 382. Giant number, the biggest number deploys 382. Okay, so number one, a year, a week, you feel good about it, but is this for an organization of 400 people for the last week? That's terrible. Or is it a team of 5 for last week? Wow. I mean, it's not useful. It's just radiating, look at this awesome big number. But to your point earlier, what am I doing with the number? What decisions am I making with this? You're an awesome team. Okay. Is the customer happier? I don't know.
Yeah, I have so many examples of that. One funny story from GitHub as well. I remember later on, after we had set up the DORA metrics, some folks from Microsoft came over to us and said, "Hey, we're trying to set up the DORA metrics."
Yeah.
And I remember they were really struggling to agree on a definition, certainly for lead time. Like they
Yeah.
couldn't really agree on what that definition would be. They also were really struggling with deployment. What is I'm curious, one specific question for you. How have you treated situations around either on-premise software or like mobile package software? How have you approached that when thinking about things like lead time or deployment frequency?
The one thing and Mick Kirsten called them out on this first in Project to Product, that lead time means from request to delivery. So we're talking about some cycle times here. Cycle time is, I'm a value stream architect. We talk about cycle times and lead times a lot. And how do I approach it? When we were working with teams in my previous organization, our goal was to teach them those fundamental skills of how to break down work, how to test, how to work as a team. And so we were setting targets during those engagements we were time boxing things. Okay, we're running 2.5-day hyper sprints. So all work must be refined and completed within 2.5 days. It breaks a lot of habits on thinking big. And so we were setting targets that way. But if when it comes to that development cycle time is totally independent on whether it's going to an app store or the cloud or wherever, because it ends at it's available for the end user. So it's going to an app store, it's available to the end user. And so what we're looking at is if you're doing continuous integration, that means you're committing at least once a day. But if it takes you more than 2 days to get something done, you probably lacked enough information to have started with. And you're doing a lot of exploratory coding, which is going to impact your quality. And it's going to make you incredibly unpredictable if you're trying to be predictable. Paul Hammett has a really good blog post, Call to Arms, One Day Stories. I think I love Paul to death. He's more militant than I am, which is awesome and amazing. I've met few people that are as militant as I am about shrinking batch size. But it's true. We saw it again and again. You want vague stories, then start using story points and saying, oh yeah, that's probably a 5 or an 8. If you want stories that we actually know what they are, then use behavior driven development and shrink them down and slice them razor thin so we can get it done in a day or two. And then we're clear before we start work, and then quality goes up. And so those quality and story size are very tightly coupled. And so but like going to an app store again, it doesn't matter because I've delivered it to an app store. It's ready to go. If the user decides not to pick it up, then I'm not going to get the level of feedback I want from them, but hopefully I'm getting feedback from some user. Hopefully, even better, we're eating our own dog food and we're using the application ourselves and getting the feedback from ourselves. People should be eating their dog food more. So that cycle time, it doesn't matter. That's completely context free.
It makes me, you said something earlier in this conversation. You said the biggest thing impacting lead time, right, isn't typically the build time, it's just the size of the work, right?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. And the larger it is, then the less clarity there is.
yeah. And that's so interesting as I think about, I see a lot of IDP, like platform teams, developer experience teams focusing in on the DORA metrics, but it makes me realize how far off those metrics are probably from what they're actually trying to measure and improve.
Let me give you another example, which is change fail rate, change fail percent. And what I typically see, and when we were measuring it originally, when I was the product owner of metrics for platform at that other organization, I was like, okay, change fail rate. Okay, how can we measure that? Number one, I want to encourage people to have the ability to roll forward. And I don't have a way to detect roll forward anyway and differentiate that from just we released another feature. So we're just going to measure how often they back out because we can look at the artifact version and say, oh, you backed out, you get scored a failed change. But then when I started really digging into it, I'm like, that doesn't really make sense because what are all the things that don't require back out? And then when you go and read accelerate, and guess what change fail rate is? It's the defect arrival rate because it says any defect. It says anything requiring remediation. That's any bug. And if you take it one step further, if somebody gripes that your application doesn't do what they want it to do, that also is a bug, right? There's no difference between a bug and a feature. But if someone opens an issue, that means they're unhappy. And so we need to track their happiness rate by tracking their defect rate. So you don't check, oh, we had to back out, or this was a change that caused an incident. Incidents are a failed change, but so are all the rest of them. And you can't figure out where this defect came from. Did it come from this change, the change before? I don't know. And there's not a strong correlation between deploy and defect detection. And so you measure you measure the defect arrival rate. Are we producing fewer defects over time?
Interested to get your thoughts on looking forward. And you go into it in your paper, you suggest a lot of sort of strategies for being better at measurement,
Yeah.
being more thoughtful in measurement and improvement. But what, like, looking more broadly across the industry, where are we in big trouble? Is this just a thing that's going to repeat itself? Someone's going to come out with some shiny metrics and everyone just blindly latches for them. What do you think's the more kind of fundamental shift or solution that's needed?
Yeah. Something I frequently say is how often do you walk into a Toyota plant and see someone leading production line who doesn't understand the work that's being done? If you're going to lead software engineering, you should understand the fundamentals of software engineering. You should also understand that the artisanal approach to software engineering that's been used for so many decades is wrong. You need to understand that what we're doing is also not assembly line work. If you want to go and make the car analogy, all of software engineering up to commit is the design studio where we're trying out new brake rotors to see if it fits and adjusting the clay on the body, right? That's all of software engineering. And you can't assembly line that. You can be disciplined about it though. And you can say, we're going to make tiny changes and get feedback. And so we're going to redesign the entire car and see if you like it now. They need to understand these things. They need to educate themselves. They need to educate themselves on the fundamentals. If they don't want to, they need to hire people that are educated and trust them. If they want their business to be better, they need to understand the thing that's driving their business, and that's software.
Yeah.
Or hire smart people that do. And that's going to be, and then also for my peers, I'm tired. I'm so tired of conversations about whether testing is a thing. I'm tired of conversations about how I don't need to understand the business problem. If the business fails, I can just get into the job because I'm a programmer and people want programmers. I'm tired of that. We need to be professional software engineers. We need to deliver working solutions, and we need to be responsible to that. I shouldn't have to talk about the basics all the time. It's so tiring. There's so many people out there that just, is it time for engineering tests for software engineering to say I'm competent? I shouldn't have to talk about these things.
I love that as a concluding thought. I really enjoyed this discussion. Looking forward to sharing my read through and summary of your paper, and really excited to continue following your sort of continued talks, evangelism, and message spreading of these problems and challenges. So, really appreciate this conversation today.
Now, I appreciate the opportunity to share. I only do it because we have to make this better. And so any opportunity I can to help get it out of my head and hopefully help somebody.